Hi everybody, CBC family and anybody else who has found their way to us. I guess in this season of uncertainty it's possible that some people are visiting our site to have a look at this recording. If you have, as well as people who are normally part of our fellowship, you're most welcome. I hope you all find a bit of peace and some message of help and hope in the various things that we're recording during this season. This is different, isn't it? It's different but the same. Our method, our medium that we're using is different, but our message remains the same. Our hope in Jesus remains the same. Our dependence on God's truth, on His Holy Spirit within us, our commitment to try to be more like Jesus, for people to commit to and become more like Him, becomes the same. This is one of those seasons where, for reasons out of everybody's control, our methods have changed, but our message remains constant. And it's a different Mothering Sunday as well, isn't it? I pray that for a whole variety of people, just recognising that for some there's some unwanted distance between you and your relations on this Mothering Sunday, and we recognise also that Mothering Sunday is one of those times which carries a whole variety of associations and emotions for different ones of us. And so as one church family, you're all welcome, and we pray that there will be something fitting for everyone here. Our reading came from Philippians 4, 8-9. You probably got the link of that. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And whatever you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. I've been thinking this week about Paul's letters in particular, and so this letter to the church in Philippi, the letter we call Philippians, is particularly one that I've been dwelling on for a number of reasons. Before I get into that, we sometimes use the word epistle, don't we, instead of letter. What do we mean by epistle? It means letter, or it means message. The very nature of what we're looking at when we read a letter in the Bible might have particular resonance for us today, I think. They are messages written by Christians who cannot be with the other Christians they're sending the message to. They are conveying a message using the means and methods available to them at that time. And then add to that Philippians is one of 4 letters that we call prison letters for Paul. Letters where he refers to being in chains. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians and Philemon. Letters where Paul is housebound, we presume under Roman guard and a house arrest in Rome. And even in those circumstances, he is reaching out. He used the method of remote communication of his day to continue the lessons, to continue the communication, the fellowship, the encouragement, the challenge. Those who were able to travel then went out and conveyed the message for those who had to stay behind for a variety of reasons. Now our circumstances are different and we're not able to gather for different reasons, but I'm pretty convinced there'll be some relevant lessons for us as we look at those prison letters. So that's what I've been thinking about this week while we look together at what it means to be church when we can't gather physically as a group of people. What are the lessons from Paul here in these circumstances? What can we all pick up wherever we are listening to this? Well, firstly, I learned from Paul that his world is wider than his walls. His world is wider than the place he finds himself confined to. My wife Sue had a relative who's passed away now, who we used to go and visit in the Midlands, in the Potteries actually, not far from where our daughter Zoe now lives. And she lived in a home, but she was very definitely one of those people whose walls hadn't narrowed her world, her worldview, and her connection with family and friends. When you spoke to her about others, our friends and our family, particularly our family, she conveyed what was going on there and in the life of her church that she was no longer able to get out to, in a way that showed that she still owned it, that it was still important to her, it was still part of her world. I noticed that because that's not always what happens. Sometimes when our physical world contracts because of lack of mobility or because of the unique circumstances we find ourselves in today, then there is the danger, isn't there, that our whole world narrows. We learn from Paul that doesn't happen. He's housebound, but he's able to still reach out and looks to reach out in as variety of ways as possible. Secondly, it's very clear that he is still in fellowship, if not in physical contact. He has this loving family connection that you have in all of those letters that I've mentioned, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon. Many of them are not particularly written with an urgent agenda of something he needs to correct. You find that in some of the other letters, but in these ones, continuing the lesson, continuing the connection, continuing the Christ-likeness. I think there's a particular challenge for us in that part in the times that we're in. Thirdly, he made the most of the connections he did have, those who could visit him. He refers to them in his letters, he makes connections with them, and he welcomes the connections he does still have. Some of us can pick up the lessons from that. Some of the most profound insights that we have about Jesus, that we have about being a follower of Jesus, come from this place, from Paul. They come from a place where he isn't able to get out, and yet he's still thinking, he's still praying, he's still on this journey actually. So he's not able to be on a physical journey, but he's still on a spiritual journey of growth. And so sometimes it's things that are immediately around him. So Ephesians 6, we have put on the whole armour of God. And one can't help but draw the conclusion that that comes from a practical lesson of having an armed soldier or more than one on rotors coming to you and using what some people would see as an oppressive image as an illustrative image of the spiritual battle that we are all in. That's hugely encouraging. Take, for example, the insights in Colossians 1 about who Jesus is. So deeply profound, perhaps not matched anywhere else, and they come from this place, from a place of limited geographical mobility. And so surely we can learn from that in this season that some of the most significant, most important lessons that we can draw on can come from a place where we might be more limited than others. And of course, Paul's powerful prayers, so many of his powerful prayers come in these letters too. Paul continues to look up and look out, as well as looking in. So I think prison letters carry for us, Paul's prison letters carry for us a new resonance today. In this reading, the one that we picked from Philippians, I don't think it's particularly important to define every word. In other words, it says whatever loads of times, and then whatever is true, whatever is noble, and define truth, define noble, and so on. I don't think it's so much that as a whole variety of different things to reflect on, to think on, Paul says. I mean, some of them are to do with character traits. Some of them are to do with general truths. Some of them are to do with beauty that we find elsewhere. Some of them to do with things that we see in others that are then worth copying. Hence, the reading goes on to say, whatever you've seen in me, Paul is able to say, copy. We can pick up different things from different ones of them, but I don't think it's the detailed definition of every word that we need necessarily dwell on. I do like the fact that the word truth is literally a truth that can be tested, can be shown to be true. I think whatever is honourable is more a character trait. So that points to something in different people that we can copy and learn from. I like that. Pure can sometimes refer to like a ceremonial pureness. So that could be helpful for some of us for a variety of reasons, in terms of whatever has helped us to get right with God, and that's not to do with things that we do, it's to do with what God has done for us. Whatever is lovely often points to what is pleasing, acceptable to God. Whatever is excellent is again probably a moral thing, so something worth copying. We can learn from different definitions of those words to some extent, but as I say, that's not really what it is for me. So often those lists in the New Testament aren't so much up for us to look at the detailed definition of each individual word, so much as Paul throwing out a whole variety of things for us to think of that are good in a season where he could have been thinking about negative things, trapped as he was. I think that's the message for our time, for these particular circumstances, surely. And what he says is we should think on those things. Logizomai, Logizomai, if you're going to spell it out phonetically. To reckon, to count, to reason. If you were to give it a modern translation, it would include to kind of compute. There's a logic to it. Think through these things. So I've picked that verse today because it comes from one of the prison letters, and because it seems to me that what Paul is saying is we have a choice as to what thoughts we dwell on. And in this season, let's dwell on what is going to help us most to continue on a Christ-like journey when our physical journeys are more limited. This is a season where it feels different for different ones of us. Some of us have particular anxiety, and others that's not particularly our thing. We should pray for a greater measure of peace for all of us than we would have in our character without Jesus, and we should pray particularly for those who are anxious at this time. Some of us have particular vulnerability or particular susceptibility to the virus that's around, and we should pray for each other and for the wider community and nation in this time too, of course. But all of us have a choice as to what we focus our thoughts on, what majors on our thoughts. And the lesson from Paul here is that we can focus on so many things that point us in a Christ-like direction, and he learns that from a season of being more limited geographically. This wasn't the lesson that was scheduled in our ministry program. It might not surprise you to know that. The lesson that was scheduled in our ministry program was staying on track when disillusioned with church. And I looked at that and we just thought, well, the two of us discussed it, that might not be the most appropriate message when we are not so much disillusioned from church, so much as not able to gather in church. Some of the lessons from that might not apply, and hopefully we'll be less disillusioned with church because we'll miss being able to gather together, and we'll want to gather in another way. But there's just one bit from that message that I prepared that I do think is relevant. I was going to take some readings from 2 Timothy 2 and verse 19, where some people are becoming disillusioned with church actually because of some false teaching. And that's not the bit that I was going to major on, that we can be disillusioned for a variety of reasons. But then after that, Paul gives us something that we can hold on to when we do feel disillusioned. 2 Timothy 2:19 says, nevertheless, in spite of all these things which could be negative, God's solid foundation stands firm, sealed with this inscription, the Lord knows those who are his. Nevertheless, God's solid foundation stands firm. There's a whole variety of other things going on, a whole variety of things changing. And I love that word, nevertheless. Maybe there's something you need to hold on to, and me too, in this particular season. A nevertheless thing. Yes, there are all these other things going on, but in this time we can choose what we focus our thoughts on, and we choose to focus on nevertheless. God's solid foundation stands firm. And I'll end as that Philippians reading ends, to the peace of God be with you and with each one of us. Amen.